For decades, Corey Feldman has spoken publicly about abuse, exploitation, and systemic silence within Hollywood. In emotional interviews, Feldman repeatedly described himself not as a troublemaker seeking attention, but as someone trying to expose patterns he believed had harmed countless young performers. At one point, overwhelmed while speaking publicly, he insisted the problem involved thousands of people, not isolated incidents or rumors, but what he saw as a deeply rooted culture protected by powerful networks. Using vivid imagery, Feldman once compared the system to an octopus. Remove one arm, and another simply grows back. In his view, focusing on individual offenders was not enough because the real issue lay in the structure protecting them. He argued that the abuse survived through interconnected systems of influence, silence, and institutional protection. Actor Jim Caviezel later amplified some of these concerns during public appearances, expressing alarm over exploitation within the entertainment industry. Caviezel, who has increasingly used his platform to criticize Hollywood culture, reacted emotionally while discussing Feldman's claims about child abuse and exploitation. His remarks reflected a growing frustration among some public figures who believe uncomfortable conversations about abuse in powerful industries are too often ignored or dismissed. Feldman's own experiences began early. By age 11, he was already immersed in Hollywood, and by his teenage years he had become one of the most recognizable child stars of the 1980s through films like The Goonies, Stand By Me, and The Lost Boys. To audiences, he represented fame, talent, and youthful success. Behind the scenes, however, Feldman has long claimed he was exposed to manipulation and abuse by older, influential figures within the industry. According to Feldman, the individuals surrounding young actors were not merely isolated predators operating independently. He described a broader circle of adults with significant influence and connections, people tied not only to Hollywood power structures but to larger networks capable of protecting reputations and suppressing scrutiny. For over 30 years, Feldman attempted to bring attention to these allegations through interviews, memoirs, documentaries, and televised appearances. Yet he says his warnings were often dismissed. Critics labeled him unstable, attention-seeking, or desperate to remain relevant. Interviews discussing abuse frequently shifted away from the topic once the conversation became uncomfortable, leaving Feldman feeling publicly discredited rather than seriously heard. Supporters of Feldman argue that the consistency of his message over decades deserves closer attention. They point out that many of his claims about exploitation in entertainment culture surfaced long before broader public movements began exposing abuse by powerful figures in Hollywood and media industries. One of Feldman's most painful frustrations has been the silence of others he believes witnessed similar behavior. In interviews, he questioned why he was repeatedly expected to expose names and face backlash alone while many others who allegedly knew about abuse remained quiet. For him, the issue was never just individual wrongdoing, it was the culture of silence surrounding it. That silence, according to Feldman and others who share similar concerns, reflects the influence powerful institutions can hold over careers and reputations. In industries built on access, image, and professional relationships, speaking publicly can carry enormous personal and financial risks. Critics of Hollywood's historical culture argue that this environment allowed abusive behavior to remain hidden for years because too many people feared the consequences of confronting it openly. While some of Feldman's broader conclusions remain controversial and not every claim has been independently verified, his central argument, that vulnerable young performers were often failed by the systems meant to protect them, has gained greater public attention in the wake of numerous real-world abuse scandals across entertainment industries. Even within what critics describe as a culture of silence in Hollywood, a few voices continued speaking publicly despite professional and personal consequences. One of those voices was Corey Feldman, who reportedly spent over $1 million of his own money producing a documentary intended to expose abuse within the entertainment industry and identify alleged perpetrators. Another was Jim Caviezel, who gradually distanced himself from mainstream Hollywood while becoming increasingly outspoken about child exploitation and trafficking networks. As their public narratives began overlapping, supporters of both men argued that they were pointing towards similar concerns: systems of influence, silence, and institutional protection that they believed extended far beyond isolated incidents. To understand why Caviezel reacted so emotionally to Feldman's testimony, it helps to look at how Caviezel's public identity evolved over the past decade. Most audiences still primarily associate Caviezel with his acting career, especially his role in The Passion of the Christ. But in recent years, he has shifted much of his public attention toward advocacy and awareness surrounding child trafficking. Unlike celebrities who participate only through donations or public campaigns, Caviezel has spoken extensively about studying trafficking networks, their structures, and the methods used by exploitative organizations. His interviews often reflect a deep conviction that these systems are larger and more interconnected than many people realize. That perspective became central to Caviezel's involvement in the film Sound of Freedom, a movie inspired by the story of Tim Ballard, a former government agent who claimed to have participated in operations rescuing trafficked children. The film generated enormous public attention and controversy before and after release. Caviezel and others connected to the project later alleged that major studios and influential industry figures were reluctant to support or distribute the film. According to their claims, there was significant resistance within Hollywood toward projects centered on child trafficking themes. However, these assertions remain contested and are largely based on personal accounts rather than independently verified evidence of coordinated suppression. Despite those obstacles, Sound of Freedom was eventually released through Angel Studios and became an unexpected commercial success, earning hundreds of millions globally and attracting a large audience. Supporters interpreted the film's popularity as evidence that the public was eager for stories confronting exploitation and abuse, regardless of industry skepticism. Caviezel later described moments during audience screenings that reinforced his belief that many viewers sensed deeper systemic issues behind the themes portrayed on screen. In interviews, he frequently used the metaphor of an octopus to describe what he sees as interconnected networks of power. According to his analogy, removing one offender or one visible part of the problem changes little if the broader system enabling exploitation remains intact. He has argued that these arms extend across multiple spheres: entertainment, politics, finance, and media, with the media component being especially influential because it shapes which stories gain attention and which disappear from public conversation. Critics who share Caviezel's concerns often argue that control over narratives can be just as powerful as direct institutional authority, particularly in industries driven by public perception and reputation. At the same time, many of Caviezel's broader claims remain controversial and unverified, and some observers caution against treating speculation or generalized conspiracy narratives as established fact. Still, his public statements resonate strongly with audiences already distrustful of powerful institutions, especially after numerous real-world abuse scandals involving influential figures in entertainment, politics, and business came to light over the past 2 decades. For supporters of Feldman and Caviezel, the central argument is not merely that abuse occurred. History has already shown that it did in many cases, but that systems of silence, fear, and institutional protection allowed exploitation to continue for years before meaningful accountability arrived. At the core of Corey Feldman's long-running claims, supporters argue, sits a single unresolved question: who ultimately controls what becomes visible to the public and what remains hidden? Actor Jim Caviezel has reacted strongly in interviews to Feldman's allegations, particularly when Feldman's broader framing shifted from individual accusations to what he describes as a wider system of protection and silence. According to this interpretation, Feldman is not simply describing isolated misconduct, but a layered structure in which influence and authority extend upward through interconnected networks. In 2020, Feldman financed and released his independently produced documentary My Truth: The Rape of Two Coreys. He invested more than $1 million of personal funds into the project, framing it as an attempt to finally present his account publicly after decades of speaking out. In the film, Feldman identified several individuals by name, including Marty Weiss, John Graham, Alfie Hoffman, Dominic Brasher, and Charlie Sheen. These were not new claims made casually in passing. Feldman stated he had previously shared similar allegations with law enforcement in earlier reports that, according to him, did not lead to meaningful public action. Despite the seriousness of the accusations, the public response from the entertainment industry was largely muted. There were no major lawsuits tied to the documentary itself and no widespread public rebuttals from the industry figures mentioned. Instead, the reaction Feldman experienced was, in his view, a continuation of what he had faced for decades: silence, avoidance, and lack of institutional engagement. One of the most discussed elements of Feldman's documentary was not just the list of names, but his broader description of how he believed abuse persisted. He described a recurring structure in which younger performers were surrounded by older individuals who had varying degrees of influence, some with direct power in the entertainment industry, others with connections extending beyond it. Feldman's argument centered on the idea that protection did not always come from within Hollywood itself, but from overlapping layers of authority and association that made accountability difficult. He characterized this environment not as random or isolated misconduct, but as something more systematically reinforced, a network where mid-level offenders were allegedly shielded by high-level figures who benefited from maintaining the status quo. In his framing, cultural influence, media visibility, and professional dependency all contributed to a system where speaking out carried significant personal and professional risk. Feldman has repeatedly described his experiences as being surrounded by individuals involved in or adjacent to these dynamics throughout his early career. His accounts portray a constant presence of powerful or connected figures at industry events, premieres, and social gatherings, forming what he believes was an environment of normalized boundary violations and selective protection. During the initial release attempt of his documentary, Feldman and supporters reported technical disruptions during a live-streamed premiere, which cut off early in the broadcast. While no verified evidence has confirmed intentional interference, the incident was widely discussed online and interpreted by some viewers as suspicious due to its timing. Feldman has also pointed to later productions and investigations, such as Quiet on Set, as examples where individuals he previously named appeared in unrelated contexts years later. Supporters of Feldman view these overlaps as validation of long-standing warnings, while critics caution against drawing direct conclusions from recurring appearances of the same individuals across different projects. As the narrative expands further, some commentators have introduced broader claims about media influence and gatekeeping within entertainment coverage. One frequently cited figure in these discussions is Oprah Winfrey, though it is important to note that allegations connecting her to any wrongdoing in this context are not supported by verified evidence or legal findings. Mentions of her name typically appear within broader, often speculative discussions about media power rather than documented criminal investigations. At its core, Feldman's argument, and the interpretation advanced by some supporters, is not limited to naming individuals, but to questioning how cultural narratives are shaped, who controls access to platforms, and why certain allegations gain traction while others remain largely unheard. Critics, however, emphasize the importance of separating verified facts from inference, speculation, and pattern-based conclusions. What remains clear is that Feldman's testimony has persisted for decades, evolving from personal accounts into broader claims about structural silence within the entertainment industry. Whether interpreted as evidence of systemic failure or as contested personal narrative, it continues to generate debate about power, accountability, and how stories of abuse are recognized in public discourse. It is essential to distinguish clearly between documented facts, allegations, and interpretive narratives. Being named in records or appearing in proximity to individuals later accused of crimes does not, in itself, establish wrongdoing. With that in mind, some commentators, including Jim Caviezel in broader discussions about systemic abuse, have argued that repeated patterns of association across multiple cases can feel too consistent to dismiss as coincidence. In that context, Oprah Winfrey is sometimes referenced within online and investigative commentary due to a series of documented and reported connections. For example, her former business partner Geraldine Layla, co-founder of Oxygen Media alongside Winfrey, was reportedly listed in Jeffrey Epstein's private flight logs. Additionally, Winfrey's name has been reported as appearing multiple times in Epstein-related document releases, though appearance in such materials does not imply criminal involvement or wrongdoing. Winfrey also maintained long-standing professional and public interactions with Harvey Weinstein, once one of Hollywood's most powerful producers. She appeared alongside him at industry events, and he was among the figures she publicly acknowledged within entertainment circles. At the time, Weinstein held immense influence in the film industry, and Winfrey's presence at shared events was often cited as reinforcing his standing within elite Hollywood networks. After Weinstein's later conviction for sexual assault and rape, retrospective commentary revisited those associations, though no evidence has ever suggested Winfrey participated in or was aware of his crimes. Separately, Winfrey publicly endorsed Brazilian spiritual healer João Teixeira de Faria, known as John of God, giving him significant exposure through her platform. He was later convicted of multiple sexual abuse charges involving numerous women. Following those revelations, Winfrey issued a public statement expressing regret and disappointment regarding the situation. Some public commentators argue that parts of the entertainment industry and broader media ecosystem have historically operated with uneven accountability, where influence can shape which stories gain traction and which fade from view. In these discussions, figures like Jim Caviezel are often cited for expressing the belief that hidden or systemic wrongdoing exists within powerful institutions. Caviezel has referred to an approaching storm in interviews and appearances, framing it as a period of exposure or reckoning. These statements reflect his personal perspective and advocacy positions rather than verified predictions or confirmed outcomes. Within this same broader conversation, some people point to past scandals involving high-profile individuals such as Harvey Weinstein and Jeffrey Epstein as evidence that influential figures can operate for extended periods before facing legal consequences. It is a matter of public record that Weinstein was convicted of sexual crimes, and that Epstein was arrested on federal charges before his death in custody. Investigations into Epstein's network produced extensive documentation, including flight logs and court filings referencing numerous individuals. However, inclusion of names in documents or associations does not, by itself, establish criminal responsibility. Oprah Winfrey is sometimes included in online discourse because of her long-standing cultural influence and her past professional associations with various public figures. These discussions often reference document appearances or social proximity, but there are no criminal findings or charges linking her to Epstein-related criminal activity. Interpretations that extend beyond documented facts remain speculative and are not supported by legal conclusions. Similarly, filmmaker and actor Corey Feldman has, for decades, spoken publicly about abuse and alleged systemic problems within Hollywood. Some aspects of the individuals he named have later intersected with separate investigations or unrelated cases, while others remain unverified or disputed. His broader argument has consistently focused on what he believes to be a culture of silence and protection around misconduct in the industry. However, his claims exist alongside ongoing debate, and not all assertions have been independently substantiated. Some supporters of these narratives argue that when allegations or concerns arise, public figures or institutions typically respond with legal action or formal denial if claims are false. The absence of visible litigation or public rebuttal is sometimes interpreted by them as meaningful, though legally, silence does not equate to confirmation of guilt or wrongdoing. Across all of these discussions, a recurring emotional theme emerges: concern about vulnerable individuals and whether systems in entertainment, philanthropy, or media adequately protect them. Figures like Caviezel and Feldman frame this concern as moral urgency, often using strong language to emphasize the stakes as they see them. Ultimately, these narratives reflect a broader tension between public perception, documented legal history, and interpretive storytelling. Verified cases of abuse and criminal conviction have rightly led to increased scrutiny of powerful institutions. At the same time, separating established facts from inference, association, and speculation remains essential when evaluating claims about individuals or alleged networks.